Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he trudged through the alien marketplace, his heavy breathing echoing inside his damaged helmet. The rain on Kepler 442b wasn't like Earth rain. It burned through fabric and could eat through metal if you stayed in it too long. His environmental suit, already stretched tight across his considerable bulk, had taken damage during the crash landing 3 days ago. The other crew members hadn't made it. The cargo ship Prosperity had been carrying supplies to the outer colonies when pirates attacked. Marcus, the ship's cook and maintenance chief, had managed to reach an escape pod, but the landing had been rough. Now he was stranded on this backwater trading planet, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a few credits in his emergency pouch. The alien traders gave him curious looks as he passed their stalls. Most were Zentari, tall and willowy with crystalline skin that reflected the planet's twin suns. They whispered among themselves in their musical language, probably commenting on the strange, round human stumbling through their market. Marcus tried to ignore the stares and focus on finding shelter before the acid rain got worse. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in over 18 hours. The emergency rations in his suit had run out yesterday, and the few credits he had weren't enough for both food and lodging. He'd have to choose, and shelter seemed more important right now. The rain was getting heavier, and he could already feel it seeping through the micro-tears in his suit. That's when he saw her. She was unlike any alien he'd encountered before. Where the Zentari were tall and thin, she was compact and sturdy, maybe 5 feet tall with silvery blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Her hair was white as starlight, pulled back in intricate braids that revealed pointed ears. She wore practical clothing, a dark jacket and pants that looked designed for work rather than fashion. What caught his attention most, though, was that she was watching him with obvious amusement rather than the suspicious curiosity of the other traders. She approached him as he stood hesitating outside a lodging house, studying the price display with growing despair. The cost was 3 times what he had left. "You look lost, big fellow," she said in heavily accented but clear standard. Her voice had a musical quality like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Marcus turned to face her, embarrassed. "Just trying to find somewhere to stay for the night. The rain's getting worse and my suit isn't exactly waterproof anymore." She looked him up and down, taking in his damaged equipment and obvious distress. Instead of the pity or disgust he expected, her expression remained amused, almost fond. "You're human, aren't you? From the stories, I expected you all to be warriors and explorers. You look more like someone's favorite uncle." Despite his situation, Marcus found himself chuckling. Not all humans are action heroes. Some of us just cook and fix things, and cook? Her ears perked up with interest. "What kind of cooking?" "Ship's galley, mostly. Nothing fancy, but I can make a decent meal out of almost anything." "Why?" she grinned, revealing small pointed teeth. "I'm Zilara, and I own a small restaurant here in the lower district. Business has been slow lately because my last cook ran off with a Zentari trader. Been trying to handle the kitchen myself, but I'm much better with numbers than with food." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "You need a cook?" "Maybe. Problem is, I live above the restaurant, and the quarters are designed for someone my size. Not..." She gestured at his considerable frame with another laugh. "Someone built like a small starship. It'll be tight, but if you're willing to squeeze in, we might be able to work something out." The rain was really coming down now, hissing as it hit the metal awnings above the market stalls. Marcus could feel it starting to eat through his suit in earnest. He didn't have much choice, and something about this alien woman put him at ease in a way he hadn't felt since the crash. "I'll take it," he said quickly. "I mean, if you're serious about the job." Zilara nodded and gestured for him to follow. "Come on then, before that rain dissolves you completely. Fair warning, though, the stairs are narrow and the ceiling's low. You're going to have to duck a lot." She led him through the winding streets of the lower district, past shops selling exotic foods and technological gadgets he didn't recognize. The buildings here were older, built from local stone that had weathered to a pleasant gray-green color. They stopped in front of a modest establishment with warm light spilling from its windows. A sign in multiple languages advertised Zilara's Kitchen, fresh food, fair prices. "This is it," she announced proudly. Not much to look at from the outside, but the food's honest and the company's good. Inside, the restaurant was cozy and welcoming. Round tables filled the main room, each lit by a small bioluminescent lamp that cast a soft blue glow. The walls were decorated with what looked like family photos and local artwork. Everything was scaled for being Zilara's size, which meant Marcus had to duck under hanging decorations and be careful not to knock over the delicate-looking furniture. "Kitchen's through here," Zilara said, leading him behind the counter. "And upstairs is where you'll be staying. Like I said, it's going to be cramped." The stairs were indeed narrow, barely wide enough for Marcus's shoulders. At the top, Zilara opened a door to reveal a small apartment that would have been comfortable for someone her size but looked like a child's playhouse to Marcus. The ceiling was so low he'd have to stay hunched over, and the bed looked like it might fit half of him. "I know it's not ideal," Zilara said, watching his expression with concern. "If you want to look elsewhere." Marcus looked around the tiny space, then at his hostess. She'd offered him shelter, food, and work when she had no reason to trust him. The cramped quarters were a small price to pay for kindness. "It's perfect," he said, meaning it. "When do I start cooking?" Zilara's grin returned, bright as the twin suns. "How about right now? I've got a dinner crowd coming in soon, and I have no idea what to feed them." Marcus rolled up his sleeves, feeling hopeful for the first time since the crash. Maybe being stranded on an alien world wouldn't be so bad after all. Marcus discovered that cooking for aliens presented unique challenges he'd never faced on human ships. Zilara's kitchen was well equipped, but everything was sized for her diminutive frame. He had to crouch constantly, and his thick fingers struggled with the delicate controls on her cooking equipment. Worse, half the ingredients in her storage room were completely foreign to him. "What exactly is this supposed to be?" he asked, holding up a writhing, purple, tentacle-like vegetable that seemed to be trying to escape his grip. Zilara laughed from where she was setting up tables in the dining room. "Krelly root. Very popular with the Zentari customers. You boil it until it stops moving, then slice it thin. Tastes like what you humans call mushrooms." Marcus eyed the still wriggling vegetable suspiciously. "Right, and this?" He gestured to a container of what looked like glowing blue rice. "Astral grain. Just add water and heat. It'll stop glowing when it's ready." The dinner crowd began arriving just as Marcus was getting his bearings in the strange kitchen. Through the service window, he could see Zentari families taking their seats, along with a few other species he didn't recognize. The conversations were a mix of languages, creating a pleasant background hum. His first few dishes were disasters. The Krelly root turned to mush when he overcooked it, and the astral grain somehow caught fire despite being wet. Zilara handled the complaints with grace, charming the customers and buying Marcus time to figure things out. Her faith in him was both touching and terrifying. But Marcus had been cooking for difficult crews on long space voyages for over 15 years. He understood that food was about more than just nutrition. It was comfort, community, and sometimes the only bright spot in a difficult day. These alien customers weren't so different from homesick miners or stressed cargo haulers. He started adapting human techniques to alien ingredients. The Krelly root, when barely cooked and seasoned with local spices, had a delightful texture. The astral grain, he discovered, responded well to being treated like risotto, stirred constantly and added too slowly. A purple fruit that tasted like cinnamon-flavored meat became the base for a sauce that had customers asking for seconds. "How did you make the creche fruit taste like that?" asked a young Zentari patron, her crystalline skin flushed with pleasure. "My grandmother could never get it right." Marcus wiped his hands on his apron, which Zilara had hastily enlarged using fabric from old tablecloths. "Trade secret," he said with a wink. "But I might be able to teach your grandmother a few tricks if she's interested." Word spread quickly through the lower district that Zilara's kitchen had a new cook who could make traditional foods taste better than anyone remembered. Within a week, Marcus was serving customers from species he'd never even heard of, each bringing their own culinary traditions and expectations. The Vorthak, massive creatures covered in chitinous plates, preferred their food nearly raw and at temperatures that would burn most beings. Marcus rigged up a secondary heating system using spare parts from Zilara's old equipment. The free, gaseous beings who absorbed nutrients rather than eating required their food to be perfectly aromatic. Taste was irrelevant, but the smell had to be precisely balanced. Marcus spent hours learning to blend spices for their unique senses. Each night after the last customer left, Marcus and Zilara would sit in the empty restaurant sharing a meal and talking about the day. She told him about growing up on this world, how her people had been traders and diplomats for centuries, mediating between the more aggressive species in this sector. He told her about Earth, about the colonies, about the feeling of cooking for people who depended on you for one of the few pleasures available in the void between stars. "Your people are remarkable," Zilara said one night, watching him expertly fillet a fish-like creature that had been brought in by a grateful customer. "The stories we hear about humans are all about your wars and your aggression, but you make people happy with food." Marcus paused in his work. "We're not all soldiers and explorers. Most of us are just trying to get by, same as everyone else. But I think maybe that's what makes us human. We take care of each other. Food is just one way of doing that." The cramped living quarters above the restaurant had become surprisingly comfortable. Marcus had learned to navigate the low ceilings and narrow spaces, and Zilara had helped him modify the furniture to better accommodate his size. More importantly, he'd found something he'd lost after the crash: purpose and belonging. But their peaceful routine was disrupted 3 weeks later when a group of hegemony officials arrived at the restaurant. The hegemony was the local government, dominated by the Zentari and known for their strict regulations about off-world residents. The lead official, a tall Zentari with geometric patterns carved into his crystalline skin, looked around the restaurant with obvious disdain. "We've received reports about an unlicensed alien worker at this establishment." Zilara stepped forward, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by careful diplomacy. "Officer Keth, this is Marcus Thompson. He's helping me in the kitchen while I search for a permanent replacement for my previous cook." "Helping?" Officer Keth's voice was like breaking glass. "Our records show this human has been here for weeks without proper documentation. He's operating without a work permit, residence permit, or health clearance." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd been so focused on getting his life back together that he hadn't thought about the legal implications of his situation. On human worlds, refugees from ship disasters were given temporary assistance while they got back on their feet. Apparently, alien bureaucracy worked differently. "How long do I have?" Marcus asked quietly. "Standard deportation procedures require you to be off-world within 72 hours. Since there are no human ships currently in port, you'll be transferred to a detention facility until transport can be arranged." Zilara's hands clenched into fists. "That's ridiculous. Marcus has done nothing wrong. He's contributed to the community. He pays his taxes, his customers love him. What more do you want?" Officer Keth's expression didn't change. "Compliance with hegemony law. No exceptions." That night, as Marcus packed his few belongings, Zilara sat on the tiny bed beside him. "There has to be something we can do," she said. "Some legal procedure, some appeal process." Marcus shook his head. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, Zilara. More grateful than I can say. But I'm just one human with no money and no connections." "They're right, I don't belong here." Zilara was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and Marcus recognized the expression from that first day in the market. It was the look she got when she was planning something that amused her. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "there might be one option we haven't considered." Zilara's plan turned out to be both simple and completely insane. "Marriage?" Marcus stared at her across the breakfast table, nearly choking on his coffee. "You want to marry me?" "Not want to," Zilara corrected with her characteristic grin. "Need to. According to hegemony law, spouses of citizens automatically receive permanent resident status. It's an old law, designed to prevent families from being separated, but it still applies." Marcus set down his cup carefully. "Zilara, I can't ask you to do that. Marriage should mean something, not just be a legal convenience." "Who says it would just be legal convenience?" Her tone was light, but there was something serious in her eyes. "We work well together. We enjoy each other's company. We share meals and stories and laugh at each other's jokes. How is that different from half the marriages in the galaxy?" Before Marcus could respond, the restaurant's front door chimed. Their first customer of the day was Kren, an elderly Vorthak who came in every morning for what he called the human's impossible breakfast, a dish Marcus had created by combining Vorthak nutritional requirements with human cooking techniques. "Morning." "Kren," Marcus called out, grateful for the interruption. "The usual?" "Of course," Kren rumbled, his chitinous plates clicking as he settled into his specially reinforced chair. "Though I hear this might be my last chance to enjoy it." Word traveled fast in the lower district. Marcus began preparing Kren's meal, trying to focus on the familiar routine instead of Zilara's proposal. But as he worked, he found himself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a stranded refugee with no prospects and no hope. Now he had work he loved, friends who cared about him, and a life that felt meaningful. All because one alien woman had looked at a desperate human and decided to help. More customers arrived as the morning progressed. Each one had heard about the deportation order, and each one had something to say about it. The young Zentari woman, whose grandmother Marcus had taught to cook, brought a petition signed by 200 residents of the lower district. A group of free merchants offered to fund his legal appeals. Even some of the upper district's wealthy Zentari sent messages expressing their displeasure with the hegemony's decision. "You've made quite an impact," Zilara observed during a brief lull between the breakfast and lunch rushes. "People don't usually care this much about deportation cases." Marcus wiped down the counter, still processing the morning's events. "I just cook food. Nothing special about that." "That's where you're wrong." The voice came from the entrance where Officer Keth stood looking decidedly uncomfortable. Behind him were several other hegemony officials, including one Marcus didn't recognize, an elderly Zentari woman with elaborate robes and an air of authority. "Counselor Vash," Zilara said, offering a respectful bow. "This is an unexpected honor." Counselor Vash nodded acknowledgement, then turned her attention to Marcus. "So you're the human who's caused such a stir. I've been getting calls all morning from constituents demanding I intervene in your case." "I don't want to cause trouble," Marcus said. "I just want to stay and work." "Trouble?" Counselor Vash laughed to sound like crystal bells. "Young man, you've created the most successful cultural exchange program we've seen in decades, and you did it with nothing but food and kindness. The lower district's economic indicators have improved significantly since you arrived." Officer Keth shifted uncomfortably. "Counselor, the law is clear. He lacks proper documentation." "Yes, Keth, I'm aware of the law. I helped write most of it." Counselor Vash's voice carried the weight of long authority. "But I'm also aware that laws exist to serve the people, not the other way around. This human has clearly demonstrated his value to our community." She approached Marcus, studying him with shrewd eyes. "I understand you've received a marriage proposal." Marcus glanced at Zilara, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, ma'am. Though I'm not sure it's appropriate to marry someone just to avoid deportation. Normally I'd agree. Marriages of convenience undermine the institution and often end badly for everyone involved." Counselor Vash paused. "However, I've been observing you and Zilara for the past few days. The way you work together, care for each other, build something meaningful together. It doesn't look like convenience to me." Zilara stepped forward. "Counselor, with respect, our personal feelings aren't really the government's business." "No, they're not. But the welfare of our citizens is." Counselor Vash turned back to Marcus. "Zilara is one of our most successful small business owners and a respected member of the community. If she believes you're worth the risk, that carries weight with me." Marcus looked around the restaurant, at the tables where he'd served meals to dozens of different species, at the kitchen where he'd learned to create dishes that brought people together, at Zilara who'd offered him shelter and work, and now something much more precious. "If I marry Zilara," he said slowly, "it won't be just for the legal status. It'll be because I care about her and want to build a life with her. Is that something the hegemony can accept?" Counselor Vash smiled. "I think the hegemony can live with that. Officer Keth, please prepare the necessary residency documentation. And while you're at it, see about getting Mr. Thompson a proper business license. This restaurant has become a cultural landmark." After the officials left, Marcus and Zilara stood alone in the quiet restaurant. The lunch crowd would be arriving soon, but for now they had a moment to process what had just happened. "So," Zilara said, "was that a yes to my proposal?" Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who'd taken in a stranger, taught him about her world, stood up for him against bureaucracy, and offered to change her entire life to help him. Somewhere along the way, taking care of each other had become something deeper. "It was a yes to building a life together," he said. "The marriage is just making it official." Zilara's grin could have lit up the room. "Good, because I was getting tired of having to duck under you every time I wanted to get something from the high shelves in the kitchen." Marcus laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "You know, there are some advantages to having a human around." "I'm counting on it," Zilara said. "Now let's get married before the lunch rush. I have a feeling we're going to be very busy for the rest of our lives." The wedding was simple but meaningful, held in the restaurant 3 days later with customers and neighbors serving as witnesses. Counselor Vash performed the ceremony, and Kren provided what passed for wedding music among his people. A rhythmic clicking that somehow felt festive, as Marcus and Zalara exchanged vows, promising to care for each other and build something beautiful together. He thought about the strange turns his life had taken. A ship disaster had seemed like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning of something he'd never expected to find among the stars. Home. 6 months after their wedding, Marcus discovered that being married to an alien came with challenges that had nothing to do with cultural differences or language barriers. The problem was that their success was attracting the wrong kind of attention. It started with small things. Equipment deliveries that arrived damaged, suppliers who suddenly couldn't fulfill orders, health inspectors who showed up twice a week looking for violations they never found. Marcus might have dismissed it as bad luck, but Zalara recognized the pattern. "It's the syndicate," she explained one evening as they counted the day's earnings. The profits had been good despite the harassment, but barely enough to cover the increased costs of dealing with constant problems. They control most of the restaurant trade in the upper district. Having a successful establishment in the lower district makes them nervous. Marcus looked up from the financial records. What kind of control are we talking about? Protection fees, exclusive supplier agreements, requirements to hire their people whether you need them or not. Zilara's expression was grim. Most businesses pay because it's easier than fighting, but the costs eventually drive them under. Then the syndicate buys the properties cheap and runs them as fronts for other operations. And if we don't pay, then the harassment escalates until we're forced to close or sell. That night, Marcus lay awake in their modified bed. Zalara had managed to find a larger mattress, though it still barely contained his frame, thinking about everything they'd built together. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It was a community gathering place where different species met and shared meals and stories. Losing it would hurt more than just their income. The escalation Zalara had warned about began the next week. A group of thugs, Marcus wasn't sure what species they were, but they were large and mean-looking, started hanging around outside the restaurant, intimidating customers. Sales dropped immediately. Then someone broke into their supply room and contaminated 2 weeks' worth of ingredients with a chemical that made everything taste like rotting fish. Marcus had to throw out hundreds of credits worth of food and scramble to find new suppliers who could deliver on short notice. "This is getting serious," Marcus told Zalara as they surveyed the damage. "Maybe we should consider paying them." Zalara's jaw set in a way Marcus had learned meant she was furious but trying to stay calm. "If we pay, we're trapped. The fees will keep going up until we can't afford them, and then we lose everything anyway. At least this way we're fighting back." The breaking point came 3 days later. Marcus arrived early to prep for the breakfast service and found that someone had ransacked the kitchen. Every pot, pan, and utensil had been thrown around the room. The stove had been damaged and someone had carved threatening messages into the wooden prep tables. But what made Marcus truly angry was the small detail he noticed as he surveyed the destruction. Someone had deliberately smashed the bioluminescent lamps that Zalara's grandmother had made for the original restaurant. They were irreplaceable, and destroying them wasn't about business or territory, it was about hurting Zalara personally. "That's enough," Marcus muttered, rolling up his sleeves. "Zalara, can you get word to our regular customers that we'll be closed for a few days?" "Marcus, what are you planning?" "I'm going to have a conversation with some people about proper business etiquette." Zalara grabbed his arm. "These aren't just local bullies. The syndicate has connections throughout the sector. They have money, weapons, and people who won't hesitate to hurt you." Marcus looked down at his wife. When had he started thinking of her that way? And felt something fierce and protective stir in his chest. "They broke your grandmother's lamps, Zalara, and they think they can intimidate us into giving up everything we've worked for. So what's your plan? Challenge them to single combat? Storm their headquarters with a kitchen knife? Nothing that dramatic. I'm just going to cook for them." Zalara stared at him. "You're going to what?" Marcus began gathering ingredients from what remained of their supplies. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." What Marcus did was something that would become legend in the lower district. He prepared a feast, the most elaborate meal he'd ever created, using techniques and ingredients from a dozen different worlds. Then he loaded it all into delivery containers and, with Zalara reluctantly helping, transported it to the syndicate's headquarters in the upper district. The syndicate boss was a Zentari named Vex who'd apparently made his fortune through a combination of legitimate business and activities that weren't quite illegal but definitely weren't ethical. His office was on the top floor of a gleaming tower that overlooked both the upper and lower districts. Getting past his security was easier than Marcus had expected. Guards who were prepared for threats and bribes weren't sure how to handle a smiling human carrying food containers and asking politely to see their boss. "What is this?" Vex demanded when Marcus was finally escorted into his office. The syndicate boss was tall even for a Zentari, with expensive modifications that made his crystalline skin shine with embedded precious metals. "Lunch," Marcus said simply, beginning to unpack the containers. "I thought you might be hungry." "You thought I might be?" Vex looked around at his lieutenants as if making sure he'd heard correctly. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea who I am? You're the person who's been trying to drive my wife and me out of business. And you're probably also someone who hasn't had a really good meal in years." Marcus continued setting out dishes, each one filling the air with aromas that made even Vex's hardened criminals pause and sniff appreciatively. "I don't eat food prepared by enemies. Then it's a good thing. I'm not your enemy." Marcus finished arranging the meal and stepped back. "This is creche fruit with Vorthak spices, prepared according to a recipe I learned from Zilara's grandmother. This is astral grain risotto with mushrooms that only grow in the deep caves on Kepler 442b, and this is something I developed specifically for Zentari nutritional needs. It's based on traditional Earth comfort food but modified for your metabolism." Despite himself, Vex was listening. The aromas filling his office were unlike anything he'd experienced. "You spent years building a business empire," Marcus continued. "You understand the value of quality and the importance of reputation. This restaurant isn't competition for you, it's an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" Marcus gestured to the feast he'd prepared. "Try the food, then let me explain." What followed was the strangest business negotiation in the history of the syndicate. Vex and his lieutenants ate Marcus's cooking, while Marcus explained his vision for expanding their legitimate restaurant operations. Instead of squeezing out competition, they could franchise Marcus's techniques and recipes throughout the sector. "Human cooking methods are completely new here," Marcus explained, as Vex savored the modified comfort food. "You could be the first to capitalize on that market. Instead of one restaurant paying protection fees, you could have 50 restaurants paying licensing fees for the right to use techniques I develop." By the time the meal was finished, Vex was looking at Marcus with the calculating expression of someone seeing a potential gold mine. "You're proposing a partnership? I'm proposing that you stop seeing me as a threat and start seeing me as an asset. Zilara and I keep our restaurant, but we also develop new recipes and cooking methods for your legitimate businesses. You get a cut of the profits from the expanded operations, and we get protection and support for our work." Vex was quiet for a long moment, then laughed, a sound like breaking glass that somehow managed to be amused rather than threatening. "You know what the most impressive thing about this proposal is?" he asked. "You didn't try to bribe me or threaten me or appeal to my better nature. You just made me an offer that benefits both of us." "That's how humans do business," Marcus said. "We find ways for everyone to win." The handshake that sealed their agreement was awkward. Vex's crystalline hand was much larger than Marcus's soft human one, but it marked the beginning of something unprecedented in the sector's business community. 2 years after his partnership with Vex began, Marcus found himself facing a problem he'd never expected. Success was threatening to destroy everything he'd originally wanted to build. Marcus Thompson's Galactic cuisine now had locations on 12 worlds throughout the sector. The cooking techniques he'd developed had been adapted for dozens of different species, and the profits were beyond anything he'd imagined when he first stumbled into Zilara's restaurant. But with success came complications that made Marcus long for the simpler days when his biggest worry was fitting through doorways. The original restaurant in the lower district had become a tourist destination. Wealthy beings from across the sector made pilgrimages to eat at the place where it all started, often paying ridiculous prices for meals that had once cost a few credits. The community atmosphere that Marcus treasured was disappearing under the pressure of celebrity and commerce. Worse, corporate representatives had begun approaching him with buyout offers. The hegemony government wanted to make him a cultural ambassador. 3 different universities had offered him positions developing xenobiology dietary programs. Everyone wanted a piece of the fat human who'd revolutionized interspecies cuisine. We could retire, Zilara pointed out one evening as they reviewed yet another acquisition proposal. Take the money and travel the galaxy. See all those worlds where your restaurants are operating. Marcus set down the contract without reading it. Is that what you want? Zilara was quiet for a moment, then gestured around their little apartment above the restaurant. The space had been expanded as much as structurally possible, but it was still cramped by human standards. I want you to be happy. If staying here is making you miserable, I'm not miserable. I'm just lost, I think. This all grew so fast, and somewhere along the way, it stopped being about bringing people together over food and started being about profit margins and expansion strategies. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the restaurant below. Raised voices, the sound of furniture being moved, and what sounded like Kren's distinctive rumbling laugh. Marcus and Zilara exchanged glances and headed downstairs to investigate. What they found was organized chaos. Their regular customers had apparently decided to redecorate the restaurant while it was closed for the evening. Tables had been rearranged to create a more intimate setting. The bioluminescent lamps had been supplemented with others that cast warmer, more varied light. Most surprisingly, someone had painted a mural on one wall depicting beings from dozens of different species sharing a meal together. What's all this? Marcus asked. Kren looked up from where he was adjusting a table's height. Intervention. You've been moping around for weeks, and frankly, it's affecting the quality of your cooking. My cooking is fine, Marcus protested. Your technique is fine, corrected the young Zentari woman whose grandmother Marcus had taught. But you've lost the joy in it. Food without joy is just nutrition. The free merchant who'd helped organize the petition during Marcus's deportation crisis materialized beside them. We've been talking and we think we know what the problem is. You're trying to be everything to everyone instead of just being yourself. Over the next hour, Marcus's regular customers explained their plan. They'd formed what they called the Lower District Dining Collective, a group dedicated to preserving the community atmosphere that had made the original restaurant special. They'd pool resources to help Marcus buy out his various corporate partners and return the restaurant to local ownership. But what about all the other locations? Marcus asked. The jobs, the people who depend on this business? Keep them, suggested Councillor Vash, who'd apparently been part of the conspiracy. But run them as cooperatives instead of corporate franchises. Train local cooks in your techniques, then let them adapt those techniques to their own community's needs. Zilara squeezed Marcus's hand. It's a good plan. You could still help people across the galaxy, but without losing what made this place special in the first place. The restructuring took months to complete. Vex surprisingly was supportive of the transition. I got into this for the profits, he admitted. But staying in it for the relationships has been more satisfying than I expected. Besides, happy workers are more productive than exploited ones. The process of converting the franchise locations to cooperatives required Marcus to travel extensively for the first time since arriving on, Kepler 442b. What he found on those worlds reinforced his belief that food could bridge cultural divides in ways that diplomacy and commerce couldn't. On Vorthek Prime, the local cooperative had developed a method for preparing traditional human comfort foods at the extreme temperatures their species preferred. The result was a dish that satisfied both human nostalgia and Vorthak nutritional needs, creating a unique fusion, cuisine that neither culture could have developed alone. The Free Collective had taken his aromatic cooking techniques and expanded them into an entire sensory dining experience that incorporated music, lighting, and even electromagnetic fields to create meals that engaged all of their gaseous senses. Humans who ate there reported that it was like dining inside a symphony. Each world had taken his basic principles: respect for ingredients, attention to cultural preferences, and the belief that sharing food builds community, and created something uniquely their own. Marcus realized that his greatest contribution hadn't been any specific recipe or technique, but the idea that cooking could be an act of love and understanding between different species. When he returned to Kepler 442b after 6 months of travel, Marcus found that the restaurant had evolved in his absence. Zilara had instituted community nights where customers could bring dishes from their own cultures to share. The menu now included items developed by regular patrons, with credits and stories about their origins. Welcome home, Zilara said, as he ducked through the doorway that first night back. How does it feel to be a galactic celebrity? Marcus looked around the restaurant, at the familiar faces, the comfortable atmosphere, the evidence of the community they'd built together. "It feels like I've been away too long," he said. "How does it feel to be married to one?" Zilara grinned and gestured to the kitchen, where a new prep station had been installed at the perfect height for someone Marcus's size. "It feels like I finally got my kitchen partner back. Now stop talking and start cooking. The dinner crowd is expecting their favorite chef to be back tonight," as Marcus tied on his apron, now properly sized and embroidered with head chef in multiple languages. He felt the contentment that had been missing during his travels. Success was satisfying, but it couldn't replace the simple pleasure of cooking for people he cared about. The first order of the evening came from Kren. The human's impossible breakfast, but make it dinner-sized. Some things, Marcus reflected as he began cooking, never changed. And that was exactly how he liked it. That night, as he and Zilara closed the restaurant and headed upstairs to their small but comfortable home, Marcus thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. A ship disaster that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of a life he never could have imagined. 5 years had passed since Marcus first sought shelter from the acid rain, and the galaxy had changed in ways both subtle and profound. What the news networks called the Thompson effect had spread far beyond restaurants and food service. The principles Marcus had demonstrated, that cooperation produced better results than competition, that understanding led to prosperity, and that kindness was a practical business strategy, were being adopted by organizations throughout known space. But Marcus himself was focused on a much smaller and more immediate concern. The small, squirming bundle in his arms that represented the newest challenge in his already complicated life. "She's definitely got your appetite," Zilara observed with exhaustion-tinged amusement as little Elena finished her bottle with remarkable efficiency. "And possibly your lung capacity, the baby," their daughter, through the miracle of modern reproductive technology that could combine genetic material from any two compatible species, was indeed vocal in her demands for attention. She had Zilara's pointed ears and silvery blue skin, but Marcus's brown eyes and what appeared to be his enthusiasm for food. "The adoption papers are finalized?" Marcus asked, gently rocking Elena while Zilara caught a few minutes of rest. "Signed and sealed. She's officially Elena Thompson Zilara, citizen of Kepler 442b and heir to a restaurant empire." Zilara's voice carried the wonder that still surprised them both when they thought about how their lives had unfolded. The restaurant below them was busier than ever, but the nature of the business had evolved again. What had started as a simple eatery had become something unprecedented, a genuine interspecies cultural center. The dining room hosted art exhibitions, musical performances, and diplomatic meetings alongside its regular meal service. The kitchen had become a teaching facility where young cooks from dozens of worlds learned not just techniques, but the philosophy behind creating food that brought people together. Marcus had also taken on a role he'd never expected: informal ambassador for human cuisine and culture. Not the official diplomatic position various governments had offered him, but something more personal and immediate. When conflicts arose between species, representatives often found their way to Zilara's kitchen, where the neutral atmosphere and excellent food seemed to make difficult conversations easier. The latest such visit had occurred just 3 days before Elena's adoption was finalized. A trade dispute between the Vorthak Collective and the Free Commonwealth had escalated to the point where both sides were considering economic sanctions. The ambassadors had agreed to meet at the restaurant, partly because it was neutral territory, but mostly because Marcus's food had a reputation for improving people's moods. The problem, the Vorthak representative had explained between bites of perfectly prepared Krelly root, is that the Free want to modify our traditional trade agreements to account for their new atmospheric processing techniques. But their proposals would fundamentally alter the economic relationship our peoples have maintained for centuries. The Free diplomat, a shimmering cloud of barely contained energy, had pulsed with frustrated colors. The Vorthak refused to understand that our new capabilities mean we can offer them better terms than ever before. Their insistence on maintaining outdated agreements is preventing both our peoples from prospering. Marcus had listened while serving a carefully orchestrated meal that included dishes both species enjoyed, along with subtle aromatics that promoted calm and clear thinking. As the conversation continued, he began to understand that the real issue wasn't economics or politics, it was fear of change and uncertainty about whether new agreements would be honored. "Have either of you ever considered a gradual transition?" he'd asked during a lull in the negotiations. "Maybe implement the new terms on a small scale first, see how they work in practice, then expand if both sides are satisfied." The solution that emerged from that conversation, a 5-year trial program with built-in review periods, became known as the Kitchen Table Protocol and was subsequently adopted by trade negotiators throughout the sector. Not because Marcus was a brilliant diplomat, but because he'd created an environment where reasonable people could have reasonable conversations. "You realize," Zilara said as she watched him successfully soothe Elena back to sleep, "that our daughter is going to grow up thinking this is normal, having aliens over for dinner, solving galactic problems over dessert, running a business that spans multiple worlds. Is that a problem?" Zilara smiled. "I think it's wonderful. She'll grow up believing that cooperation and kindness are normal, that differences between species are just interesting variations rather than reasons for conflict. The galaxy could use more people like that." A gentle knock on their apartment door interrupted the quiet moment. Marcus carefully placed Elena in her crib, specially designed to accommodate a hybrid child's unique needs, and went to see who was visiting so late. He found Counselor Vash waiting in the hallway, looking unusually formal despite the late hour. "Counselor," Marcus said, stepping aside to let her in. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Marcus. Better than fine, actually. I came to deliver some news that couldn't wait until morning." She glanced around the apartment, taking in the evidence of new parenthood, feeding supplies, tiny clothes, monitoring equipment for Elena's unique physiology. "Congratulations on the adoption, by the way. The whole sector is excited to meet the first human Zalari hybrid." "Thank you. What news?" Counselor Vash smiled with genuine pleasure. "The Galactic Council has voted to establish a new position, Secretary of Interspecies Cultural Affairs. It's designed to promote understanding and cooperation between different civilizations through cultural exchange rather than traditional diplomacy." Marcus felt a familiar sense of impending upheaval. "Let me guess, they want me for the job. They want to offer you the job. There's a difference. The position would be based here on Kepler 442b, with the restaurant serving as an unofficial embassy for cultural exchange. You'd continue doing exactly what you're already doing, but with official support and resources." Zilara emerged from the bedroom, having heard enough of the conversation to understand what was being discussed. "What kind of resources?" "Funding for expansion of the cultural programs you've already started, support for establishing similar centers on other worlds, access to diplomatic channels when food-based negotiations might be more effective than traditional treaties." Counselor Vash paused. "And most importantly, protection for your family and your work from anyone who might see interspecies cooperation as a threat." Marcus looked at Zilara, then at the crib where Elena slept peacefully, then back at the counselor. "We'll need to think about it." "Of course. But Marcus, I hope you'll consider that what you've built here isn't just a restaurant or even a business. It's a model for how different peoples can coexist and thrive together. The galaxy needs more of that." After Counselor Vash left, Marcus and Zilara sat in their kitchen sharing a late dinner and discussing the offer. Through the windows they could see the lights of both the upper and lower districts, no longer the segregated communities they'd once been. "What do you think?" Zilara asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. 2 years ago he might have been intimidated by the scope of the responsibility, but watching Elena sleep peacefully in her crib, surrounded by the community they'd built together, he felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. "I think," he said, "that we've already been doing the job. Making it official just means we can do it better." The next morning, Marcus stood in the restaurant kitchen, preparing breakfast for the usual crowd of regulars who'd become like family over the years. Elena dozed in a carrier on his chest, already accustomed to the sounds and smells of the busy kitchen. Zilara worked the front of house, greeting customers and managing the endless stream of visitors who came to experience the famous restaurant. As he watched Kren share a table with a group of young Zentari students, all of them laughing at something one of the humans from the morning shift had said, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A simple search for shelter from the rain had led to marriage, business success, diplomatic recognition, and now parenthood. But the most remarkable thing wasn't any of those achievements. It was the realization that home wasn't a place or a planet or even a species. Home was wherever you found people who cared about you and gave you the chance to care about them in return. Elena stirred in her carrier, making the small sounds that meant she was waking up and would soon want feeding. Marcus smiled and adjusted her position so she could see the busy kitchen around them. "Welcome to the family business, little one," he whispered. "It's going to be quite an adventure."